Coming up on Network Africa. At least 2 civilian killings reported in Ethiopia's Amhara Unrest. Germany expels Chad's envoy in retaliatory move days after German ambassador to Chad, Jan Christian Crick, was kicked out of Chad. Plus, concerned by death threats against its representative Volker Perthes in Sudan. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We start off in Ethiopia, where the unfortunate news has been reported that at least 2 civilians who had sheltered in a displacement camp have been killed during clashes in the city of Debre Birhan as protests intensify in the country's Amhara region. Residents say that Tuesday's clashes between federal security forces and local militias in the area, 130 kilometers north of the capital Addis Ababa, lasted for hours. According to one resident, the 2 individuals killed had been sheltering in a camp in the city after fleeing ethnic-based violence in the western Oromia region. Another resident said protesters raided a police building in the city, vowing to free people detained in connection with a massive anti-government rally on Sunday. Protests broke out last week when Ethiopia's federal government announced a plan to dissolve Amhara's regional special forces. Locals fear the move could leave the region undefended against attacks. The reforms are amongst stipulations of a peace deal between the federal government and former rebels from the Tigray People's Liberation Front, signed last November to end the conflict. And protests have continued in several places in Ethiopia's Amhara region for a 6th consecutive day in opposition to a plan to dissolve the regional paramilitary forces. Demonstrators clashed with security forces and 3 cities have imposed nighttime curfews. Despite such restrictions, including a ban on public gatherings, protests are showing no sign of subsiding. Rallies have been held in multiple towns with clashes reported in Debre Birhan and one of the cities where curfews have been announced already. Shots were also fired in the city of Kombolcha after thousands took to the streets. The advocacy group, the Amhara Association of America, has accused government troops of firing at and killing civilians on Monday and on Tuesday. There have been 8 different statements from federal and regional authorities since the protest began, in which they argued that the integration of the special forces into the national army or police will strengthen the country's security apparatus, but the protests have continued. Chad's ambassador to Germany has been expelled in a retaliatory move by Berlin after the Central African nation kicked out the European nation's ambassador last week. Germany's foreign ministry gave Mariam Ali Musa 48 hours to leave the country. German ambassador to Chad, Jan Christian Gordon Crick, left N'Djamena last Saturday after the military government expelled him. Chad ordered Mr. Crick out of the country for what it called his impolite attitude and lack of respect for diplomatic customs. A brief statement from the Chadian government gave no further details about the reason for his removal. The German ministry released its own statement saying Ambassador Crick exercised his office in N'Djamena in an exemplary manner and has worked for human rights and the rapid transition to a civilian government in Chad. Let's get more on this. We now speak to VOA's correspondent, Mohammed Yusuf. Mohammed is joining us online from Nairobi in Kenya. Hello, Mohammed.
Hello there.
So can you give us your opinion about what Chad might be opposed to in the German presence on its soil?
What it looks like the Chadian government is not happy with the what is happening in the country, of course, because there have been instances where there have been protests, of course, in the country. There have also been call for the government to transition from a military rule to a civilian rule. And this kind of statements, it looks like the government has not been happy about. But to what we understand so far is that, and I think this has come also very clear from the German's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that its ambassador, it's happy with its ambassador, and it believes the ambassador was also involved in issues of human rights and also the need for Chad to transition from a military rule to a civilian rule. So what we understand is that the current president, Mohamed Idris Deby, who took power from his father when he was killed in fighting rebels in northern Chad in April 2021, there was a plan to transition for 18 months. To conduct election in 18 months. That did not happen. In October 2022, last year, the government again extended that rule to another 2 years. So that is expected to end in October 2024. And before the announcement of that in October, there have been protests and civilians have been killed. And the government banned, of course, political gatherings and also the activities of civil societies. That's the understanding of what is happening. And that is an area that people believe, or experts believe, that the Chad government is not happy with. But of course, the Chad government has also said that they described the behavior of the ambassador, saying that he is diplomatic wordings or statements is impolite. That is how they basically described him. But the German has also sent the Chad ambassador out of the country, and that's where we stand now as it is. But generally, what it looks like, it surrounds human rights violations that are taking place in Chad, and also the need for the government to transition from a military to civilian rule. That is what the chief or diplomatic row is about.
Okay, let's look more about that diplomatic route. Germany says Ambassador Crick, behaved in an exemplary manner in carrying out his work in Chad. But Chad says, he did not conform to, diplomatic customs. He lacked respect, impolite attitude. What are these, these accusations that Chad is making? What are the things that the German ambassador is being accused of? Let's be more explicit.
It is clear from German Foreign Ministry, of course, here in this case, that their ambassador being involved in other activities in his role, but has also been pushing the government on issues on human rights and issues for a political transition. To what we understand is that after the extension for another 2 years in October 2022, there were protests and civilians were killed who were protesting against that extension. So the whole issue is surrounding that, and it looks like, because there has been an extension from 18 months to another 24 months, and there is any plan to conduct an election, and that is the area that these two countries now disagree, or there's misunderstanding on those issues. And remember, Chad is a country that not many people follow. Now, with this kind of diplomatic row, it's coming forward on what is happening there, and you would expect, as we move forward, more countries to talk about this diplomatic row and what's happening in Chad and the relationship between these two countries, and also the African Union at a certain point to be involved. I think this now is bringing more attention to what is happening in Chad that people haven't been, it looks like people have been neglected and people haven't been talking about. But now, without diplomatic row, there will be more talk on what is happening in Chad.
Right. Not that Germany has anything to complain about the Chadian ambassador to Germany, but this is totally a retaliation. So what's the implication of Germany replying in kind?
What is very clear now here is that there is no relationship between two countries. They've sent the ambassadors out of the countries. Now there will be no direct engagement. If there is going to be an engagement, we will be expecting that engagement to come through a third party. If for Chad's case, you will expect that to come through an African country, or at a certain point maybe African Union. For Germany, maybe to come through European Union, and also to present its case also to the African Union. That is the first implication. But what really important here in this now scenario, what's happening between the two countries, is now the issue of Chad now need to be addressed. It is 18 months. That signed took power in April 2021. Now we are in April 2023. That's 2 years. There's about another 1.5 years to election. Is there a plan for that? That may not be the case as it's going on now. But now it has become very, for Chad now itself, it shows that it's willing to stand up to itself and is not going to accept any country to lecture on how it should carry out its political activities, its governance, the human rights issues. And anyone who comes or tries to speak up, then they will get similar treatment that German ambassador received last week, and he left the country on Saturday. So that is so far the implications. But more importantly, I think now it's becoming a Chad now issue need to be addressed, and this is now something that many, not only Chad but European Union and some African countries also will be trying to bring the issue of Chad, because it looks like Chad is forgotten. People talk much about what's happening in Sudan, elections in Nigeria, political problems in other African countries, but Chad is not getting that attention. And with this now diplomatic row, you expect the country now to get more attention, and you expect people to push the government now to fast track these elections and to move from what is the military rule now to a civilian rule.
So how do Chadians themselves feel about this diplomatic squabble between the two countries?
For the people who were protesting back last year and what is happening in the country, the political situation in the country, they will feel that they have lost a voice with the ambassador. But we have also seen in African context, some governments, they whip up emotions, they push their supporters. Issues of course, in the coming days or weeks, you'll be expecting the issue of Western interferences, and we know what that means and how that is received by some African population. And now you'll be expecting a very divided society and people who believe that the way things are being handled is not right. The country needs to move from what is the military now to a civilian rule. But the people who support the military will expect those kind of divisions. But more so, people who have been fighting for good governance, for a rule of law, they will really feel that now they will be looking where to turn if there will be any government in that country who will be willing to support them. But any government now who comes out, in this case, I think will receive the treatment the Ambassador Kirk has received. But more, I think, for now, is Chadians. They will be divided on this issue. There will be more calls on both sides on what that need to be done.
So how possible is it that we see civilian rule return to Chad in a few months or a year from now?
I think the government has sent a very clear message with the German ambassador that if you talk about the issue now here is if we're going to talk anything beyond October 2024. That is when we can talk about election or any of that sort. But that is now seems like that's going to happen. But as time progresses, I think more people will be pushing the government to start preparing for election, registering people and sensitizing the population, campaigns to start, and that sort of things. I think that is what now will be pushed. But I don't think it's clear now the government doesn't want to engage on any of that issue until October 2024. But I think other people can achieve now is to start that transition, to start that electoral process if it's going to be any, if the government is willing. That will have to come soon, or if that won't happen again, you're going to have another extension. But now there will be need to push the government to start registering people and start the electoral process that can help the country move from the military to a civilian rule.
Well, thank you, VOA correspondent Mohammed Yusuf. Thank you for your time today on Network Africa. The United Nations says it's deeply concerned by a video of a man publicly calling for the killing of its representative in Sudan, Volker Perthes. The recording, which has been circulating on social media, shows an elderly Sudanese man verbally abusing the U.S. official, accusing him of interfering in the country's politics and then asking for a fatwa for him to be killed. The incident happened during a meeting held by Islamist parties linked to the ousted former leader Umar al-Bashir. In a statement, the organizers say the man's comments did not represent their views. The UN has urged Sudanese authorities to investigate it. Sudan has faced near weekly demonstrations since the army led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan seized power from a civilian government in October 2021. Coming up after the break. Italian ministers call for 6-month state of emergency to address migrant crisis stemming from North Africa. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now in Kenya, the main opposition coalition has announced plans to hold direct engagements with the public as it prepares for talks with the government on electoral reforms. On Tuesday, Azimio La Umoja coalition, led by veteran opposition leader Raila Odinga, said it remained committed to easing political tension through dialogue after its anti-government protests turned violent last month. It said it would hold its first town hall meeting on Thursday, followed by a public rally on Sunday in the capital, Nairobi, to, quote, explain to the people where we are and the upcoming course of action. He adds that Azimio remains committed to the spirit of the Easter deal that saw the two parties commit to dialogue. Both the ruling coalition and Azimio have named their representatives in the talks, which Mr. Odinga insists should be expanded beyond members of parliament. Mr. Odinga, who claims that last year's presidential election was stolen from him, called off the protest after President William Ruto agreed to talks with the opposition. Italian ministers have called a 6-month state of emergency in response to a rise in migrant numbers crossing the Mediterranean from North Africa. The decision frees up €5 million in funds and it coincides with the arrival of 3,000 migrants in 3 days. A number of boats have landed on the Italian islands of Lampedusa, and the Coast Guard has rescued some 2,000 people since Friday. 400 people on a fishing boat off the coast are yet to be helped. Migrant arrivals to Italy have risen sharply compared with the same period last year, despite efforts by Italy's right-wing coalition government to clamp down on irregular migration. At least 4 people died and more than 20 others were missing when 2 migrant boats sank off Tunisia on Saturday. German aid group Rescue said it rescued 22 people from the water and took them to Lampedusa. Tunisia has become the biggest point of departure for migrant boats in recent months. On Saturday's disaster was only the latest in a series of incidents off the coast. Lampedusa is 185 kilometers from the Tunisian port of Sfax. According to the monitoring group for IOM Missing Migrants Projects, more than 26,000 people have died or gone missing at sea in the central Mediterranean since 2014. Servant leadership, courage under fire, and the path of moral values were the focus of the inaugural annual lecture of the Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Foundation, which was held in Durban, South Africa. To do the honors as the very first speaker was his long-time friend and former president of Nigeria, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, who spoke about the key aspects of Prince Buthelezi's legacy, which are pertinent to the present global debate. The South African political icon, who may be described as controversial at certain points in his country's history, turns 95 this year and says he is glad that he and other fighters like Chief Obasanjo and Dr. Kaunda have played their part in the fight against injustice.
It was a full house filled with lessons in history, culture and brotherhood across borders as members of the public and great leaders converged on the Durban Convention Center for the inaugural Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi annual lecture. Delivering the lecture was Nigeria's former president, Olusegun Obasanjo, who refers to Prince Buthelezi as my dear senior brother. He went back many decades to the anti-apartheid struggle era, and several ways and times they worked together against a common enemy.
Prince Buthelezi, by serving in the government of national unity, was key to contributing to South Africa's expectations for peace. We must do more to promote such actions on the continent. I believe that if more leaders in Africa had the strength and foresight of Prince Buthelezi, then Africa might be able to free itself of the shackles of conflict. Then we will be able to silence the gun.
Chief Obasanjo also commended the prince, who turns 95 in August this year, for his role in preserving the Zulu monarchy and managing two major royal transitions as the Amazulu Prime Minister. A very grateful King Msuzulu Zwelithini, the current Zulu king, commended the traditional Prime Minister, who solidly stood by him as he battled siblings to ascend the throne of his father. He, however, said he had one last task for him.
One last important task, Ndabezitha, as Prime Minister to the Zulu nation. I instruct you, Ndabezitha, to organize a meeting of elders, while on my side I will organize a meeting of the youth. We would like, since God has blessed us with you till this time, to contribute to this cause, where the youth will put together with the elders to determine the future of the Zulu nation.
Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi didn't speak for long, but had many glowing words for the guest speaker.
I'm humbled to know that we, Dr. Obasanjo, Dr. Kaunda and I, have done our part to push back this darkness and see that the sun rises again. I shall never forget, for whatever is left of my life. What he said here today is exactly what needs to be said, what we need to hear in Africa. Let us take heed and consider how South Africa might benefit from the renewed perspective that we have been offered today.
The very first set of the Ubuntu Butu Awards of the Mangosuthu Buthelezi Foundation were presented to the Prince, here honored by the chairman and president of the Inkatha Freedom Party, Onmu Velenkosini Hlabisa, as well as the former president Obasanjo, and posthumously to the late Dr. Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, received by his son, Ambassador Panji Kaunda. The awards were for extensive work for the good of humanity.
Well, God's honor is the best. But are you doing something that you are making where you are better? You are making people feel that their life is being enhanced, their position is improving as a result of your contribution. And I think that is what matters. And if you doing that, it is being appreciated, then it's good.
The Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Foundation hopes to preserve the legacy of the Prince, and with a 13-point objective, intends to work to promote the virtues of nation building, constitutionalism, justice, and inclusiveness. From Durban, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has accepted an invitation to attend King Charles III's coronation, which will take place on May the 6th at Westminster Abbey in London. The UK ambassador in Zimbabwe met the president on Tuesday in the capital Harare to discuss the coronation. Ambassador Melanie Robinson tweeted a picture of the meeting in which they also talked about trade, investment, projects, and the importance of peaceful, free and fair elections later this year. In 2003, Zimbabwe pulled out of the Commonwealth, with Mr. Mugabe referring to it as an Anglo-Saxon unholy alliance against Zimbabwe when the group complained about the country's human rights record. Mr. Mugabe was overthrown in 2017, and his successor, President Mnangagwa, has sought to improve relations with the country's critics. A Commonwealth delegation visited the country last year to consider the country's readmission, but the US and the European Union both retained sanctions against companies and officials in Zimbabwe, including President Mnangagwa. And finally on the program, Mozambicans are in mourning for revered traditional leader, the Queen of Niassa, Abibi Archivangila, who died on Easter Sunday. President Felipe Nyusi led tributes to the 96-year-old monarch, expressing his admiration for her in a post on Facebook. And it's unusual for women to hold such powerful positions in traditional settings, but the Queen was the fifth in a dynasty of female monarchs dating back several hundreds of years to the fight against colonial rule. According to Mozambican writer Paulina Chiziani, the first queen came to power after defying her husband, the Niassa king, to recover people he had sold into slavery to the Dutch, who had a colony in what is now Cape Town in South Africa. She went on to hide them in a mountainous area of Niassa province's Majune district in northwestern Mozambique. Chiziane went on to describe Queen Abibi as a heroine for continuing on the spirit of this legacy. Well, that's it on the program. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.